My wife and her friends left me in the rain 87 miles from home. She said I needed a lesson. I didn't argue. I just watched them drive away. A black truck pulled up moments later. My bodyguard stepped out calm and ready. I smiled as I climbed in. Her cruelty had ended. This was her last mistake. You know what they say about karma being a well? Let me introduce you to my wife, Mira. She makes karma look like a Sunday school teacher having a bad day. There I was, standing under some beat-up highway sign that looked like it had seen better decades, watching storm clouds roll and like they had a personal vendetta against me specifically. 87 miles from home. 87. That's not a quick Uber ride or a hey, can you pick me up situation? That's a you're screwed, buddy. Distance that requires actual planning to survive. The rain hadn't started yet, but I could smell it coming. That metallic electric smell that makes your skin crawl and your brain start calculating how long you've got before you're completely soaked. My clothes were already damp from the humidity, sticking to my back like a guilty conscience. The asphalt stretched out in both directions like a concrete river of nothingness, and the only sound was the distant rumble of 18-wheelers that couldn't care less about some guy stranded on the side of the road. But here's the kicker. I wasn't actually stranded. Not really. See, while Mira and her little crew of enablers were probably high-fiving each other in the warm, leather-seated comfort of her SUV, congratulating themselves on teaching me such a valuable lesson. I was standing there with the biggest grin you've ever seen. Because what my darling wife didn't know, what she couldn't have known was that this whole night was about to become the best thing that ever happened to me. Let me paint you the picture of how we got here. Dinner at some overpriced farm-to-table place where they charge you $28 for 3 radishes and call it deconstructed salad. Mira was holding court with her usual suspects. Rial, who thinks being loud equals being interesting. Kira, who's got the emotional intelligence of a parking meter, and Tessa, who nods along to everything like one of those bobblehead dogs people put in their car windows they'd been drinking. Not enough to be legally drunk, but enough to feel invincible and make spectacularly stupid decisions. The conversation had started innocently enough, just the usual gossip about whose marriage was falling apart and whose kids were getting arrested. But then it turned to me, like it always does when Miri's had a few glasses of wine and needs to remind everyone who's really in charge. Adrian just doesn't get it sometimes, she'd said, twirling her fork around some microscopic portion of pasta that cost more than most people's car payments. He needs to learn that actions have consequences. The other 3 had giggled like middle schoolers who just heard someone say a bad word because nothing's funnier than a grown woman talking about her husband like he's a misbehaving golden retriever who peed on the carpet. What did he do this time? Belle had asked, leaning forward with that hungry look she gets when she smells drama. These women collect other people's misery like some folks collect stamps. Oh, you know, Mara had waved her hand dismissively, questioning my decisions, asking too many questions about money, the usual controlling behavior. Controlling behavior. That's rich coming from someone who once made me return a coffee mug because she didn't approve of the font. But I'd sat there smiling and nodding, playing the part of the beautiful husband who just doesn't quite measure up to his brilliant wife's expectations. I'd gotten really good at that performance over the past 8 months. Maybe he needs a reality check, Kira had suggested, and I could practically see the wheels turning in Myra's head. Nothing gets her more excited than an opportunity to prove a point, especially when that point involves making someone else miserable. By the time we'd left the restaurant, the plan was set. They were going to drive me out to the middle of nowhere and leave me there to think about my behavior. Just for a few hours, of course, just long enough to teach me a lesson about respect and gratitude and all those other things that Myra is convinced I'm lacking. The ride had been exactly what you'd expect. 45 minutes of them laughing and congratulating themselves on their cleverness while I sat in the back like luggage, watching the miles tick by on the GPS. They picked this spot specifically because it was far enough from civilization to be inconvenient, but not so far that I'd actually die of exposure. How thoughtful. You need a lesson, Adrian, Mira had said when she finally stopped the car, her fingers gripping the steering wheel like she was trying to strangle it. Walk it off. And here's the beautiful part. I didn't argue, didn't beg, didn't even look particularly upset. I just got out of the car, closed the door with a polite little click, and stood there watching them drive away. Mara was probably expecting tears, maybe some angry phone calls, definitely some graveling when I finally made it home. Instead, she got me standing under that highway sign, grinning like an idiot as their tail lights disappeared into the distance. Because what Mira and her merry band of accomplices didn't know was that I'd been expecting this, planning for it. Actually, for months, I'd been documenting every cruel comment, every casual threat, every little joke about putting me in my place. And tonight, they'd finally given me exactly what I needed. The sound of an engine made me turn around, and there it was. A black truck rolling out from behind the abandoned way station like something out of a movie. No dramatic music, no slow-mo heroics, just a simple pickup truck with Georgia plates and a driver who knew exactly what he was doing. Rook stepped out of the truck like he'd been waiting there all night, which knowing Rook, He probably had been. The man's got the patience of a saint and the planning skills of a military strategist, which makes sense considering that's exactly what he used to be before I hired him for what Mira thought was just a home security upgrade. Evening, Mr. Costas, he said in that calm, professional voice that never changes whether he's discussing weather patterns or coordinating extraction protocols. Right on schedule. Hey, Rook, I said, and I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Perfect timing, as usual. He handed me a dry jacket because, of course, he'd thought to bring one. And a thermos that probably contained the best coffee I'd tasted all week. The man thinks of everything. You sure about this? He asked, which was his way of giving me one last chance to back out, to play the victim instead of the chess master. But I've been sure about this for months. Oh, I'm sure, I said, climbing into the passenger's seat and feeling the warmth wash over me. Her cruelty ends tonight. As we drove away from that highway sign, I pulled out my phone and checked the recording app. Crystal clear audio of the entire evening, from dinner conversation to roadside abandonment. Every word, every laugh, every casual cruelty documented and timestamped. Mira thought she was teaching me a lesson about knowing my place. What she'd actually done was hand me the final piece of evidence I needed to show the world exactly who she really was. And tomorrow, when the lawyers got involved and the real consequences started rolling in, she was going to learn that some lessons cut both ways. The storm finally broke as we hit the interstate, rain hammering against the windshield like applause. I leaned back in my seat, sipped Brooke's excellent coffee, and smiled. Because after 8 months of playing the long game, tonight was the night everything changed. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting even. Let me tell you something about discovering your wife is a lying, cheating, financial predator. It's not like the movies where you dramatically confront them and storm out in a blaze of righteous fury. Real life is messier, quieter, and requires a hell of a lot more patience than Hollywood would have you believe. My awakening didn't come with a soundtrack or slow-motion revelation shots. It came on a Tuesday morning while I was trying to help Mara with what she claimed was a computer glitch. Picture this. I'm sitting at her laptop, probably looking like the helpful husband of the year, trying to figure out why her spreadsheet keeps crashing. Myra's in the shower singing some pop song off-key like she always does when she thinks she's conquered the world. I'm clicking through files, being the good little tech support guy when I stumble across something that makes my blood turn to ice water. 2 ledgers. Same charity gala, same dates, completely different numbers. The first one, the one she'd shown me when I'd asked about the unusually large administrative costs, had everything looking neat and tidy, reasonable expenses, appropriate allocations, the kind of financial responsibility that would make a CPA weep with joy. The second one, buried 3 folders deep in a directory labeled Backup Old, told a very different story. Numbers that didn't add up, receipts that didn't exist, and enough red flags to outfit a communist parade. That I sat there staring at the screen, listening to Myra's off-key warbling about being stronger than yesterday. And something clicked in my brain, not anger, that would come later. Not even surprise, really. Just this cold crystalline clarity that whispered, well, what do we have here? See, I'd been noticing things for months. Little inconsistencies that individually meant nothing, but together painted a picture I'd been too trusting or too stupid to see. The sudden consulting fees that appeared on our joint account statements. Business trips that seemed to involve a lot more resort time than actual business. Myra's new habit of taking phone calls in the garage or stepping outside whenever certain names came up in conversation. But like a good little husband, I'd made excuses. She works hard. She deserves some luxury. Business networking requires relationship building. Everyone needs privacy sometimes. I'd been so busy being understanding that I'd completely missed the fact that my wife was running a con game with our money as the stakes. That Tuesday morning, sitting in front of 2 sets of books that told 2 completely different stories, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to demand explanations or stage a dramatic intervention. I was going to do something much more dangerous. I was going to document everything. That my first call was to Valentina Cruz, a forensic accountant who specializes in what the legal world politely calls financial irregularities and what the rest of us call stealing. I'd found her through a lawyer friend who'd mentioned her work on some high-profile divorce cases. Valentina has this way of talking about embezzlement like she's discussing the weather. Calm, professional, and absolutely ruthless when it comes to following the money trail. Mr. Costas, she'd said when I explained my situation, I need you to understand something right up front. If we find what I think we're going to find, this isn't going to be a simple divorce proceeding. This is going to be a criminal matter. Good, I told her, and I meant it. The second call was to a security company that specialized in what they called residential protection services. That's where I met Rook. 6 feet of calm competence wrapped in the kind of professionalism that comes from years of keeping people alive in places where that's not a given. When I told Mira I was upgrading our home security system, she'd been delighted. Finally taking some initiative, she'd said, patting my cheek like I was a golden retriever who'd finally learned to sit if she only knew that this security upgrade included comprehensive surveillance of her home office, complete digital forensics capabilities, and a bodyguard who could disappear into the background so effectively that most people forgot he was there. Rook had installed cameras so small and sophisticated that they looked like decorative elements, microphones that could pick up conversations 3 rooms away and monitoring software that could track every keystroke on every device in the house. The third call was to Rhea Park, a divorce attorney who'd earned her reputation by being exactly as ruthless as her clients needed her to be. Rhea doesn't do amicable separations or collaborative divorces. She does scorched earth litigation for people who've discovered that their spouse isn't who they thought they married. Don't confront, she told me during our first meeting. Don't accuse. Don't change your behavior patterns. Just document everything and let me know when you've got enough evidence to bury her. And so began the most exhausting 8 months of my life. Not physically exhausting, emotionally exhausting. Do you know how hard it is to smile and nod when your wife brags to her friends about how she's training you to be more compliant? To sit through dinner parties where she casually mentions how she's teaching you respect while her friends giggle like it's the funniest thing they've ever heard. I learned to be an actor in my own life. When Mira would make one of her cutting comments about my contribution to the household, I'd smile and change the subject instead of defending myself. When she'd talk about her latest business opportunity that required a significant cash investment, I'd ask interested questions while mentally noting every detail for Valentina's files. When she'd come home from her mentoring sessions with Trent Lawson smelling like expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine, I'd kiss her cheek and ask how her meeting went. The hardest part wasn't the emotional abuse. I'd gotten used to that years ago. The hardest part was watching the numbers. Valentina had taught me to recognize the patterns. And once you know what to look for, financial fraud is as obvious as a neon sign in the dark. $5,000 here for a consulting fee that never produced any deliverables. $10,000 there for a business retreat that looks suspiciously like a romantic getaway. $15,000 for equipment purchases that somehow never materialized in our home or office. But the real breakthrough came when Mira started getting sloppy. Success had made her confident and confidence had made her careless. She stopped bothering to hide her phone calls with Trent. She stopped coming up with creative explanations for her overnight trips. She started talking about me like I wasn't even in the room, discussing my behavioral issues with her friends like I was some kind of project she was working on. That's when I started recording the conversations. Not just the financial discussions, everything. Every casual cruelty, every dismissive comment, every moment when she revealed exactly what she thought of me and our marriage. The audio files piled up like evidence in a criminal case, which, as it turned out, was exactly what they were going to become. The final piece fell into a place when Valentina traced that $15,000 business retreat to a luxury beach resort where Mira and Trent had checked in under his corporate account. Same dates, same room, registered as Mr. and Mrs. Lawson. Even the room service charges painted a picture of romantic dinners and champagne breakfasts that definitely weren't about business development. That I didn't rage when Valentina showed me the hotel records. I didn't punch walls or throw things or do any of the dramatic stuff that men in movies do when they discover their wives are cheating. I just added the paperwork to the file, thanked Valentina for her thorough work, and went home to smile and nod through another dinner conversation about Myra's mentoring relationship with Trent. Because by then, I wasn't Adrian the victim anymore. I was Adrian the prosecutor, building a case that would stand up in court and destroy the carefully constructed lies that had become my life. And every day that Mira thought she was getting away with it, every casual cruelty and confident theft was just more evidence for the pile. Patience, it turns out, really is a virtue. So there I was, sitting in Rook's truck like some kind of refugee from my own marriage, watching the windshield wipers fight a losing battle against the storm that was turning the highway into a river. You'd think after being abandoned by your wife and her merry band of sociopaths, the logical move would be to go home, maybe call a lawyer, definitely start planning your revenge. But here's the thing about revenge. If you're going to do it right, you need to think 3 moves ahead, like chess, but with higher stakes and more potential for public humiliation. Where to, boss? Rook asked, and I could hear the subtle question underneath. He knew the plan as well as I did, but he was giving me one last chance to take the easy road, to go home and pretend this was just another one of Myra's teaching moments that we'd laugh about someday. Except we both knew there wouldn't be any laughing and there definitely wouldn't be a someday. Riverton Hotel, I said, pulling out a credit card that Mira didn't know existed. Time to disappear for a while. The Riverton isn't exactly the Ritz, but it's clean. It's got decent security cameras, and most importantly, it's the kind of place where the night clerk actually pays attention to details. Like when a guy shows up at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, soaked to the bone and looking like he's been through hell. The kind of details that make for excellent witness testimony when you need to establish a timeline. Rook dropped me off at the front entrance, and I made sure to walk slowly past every camera between the parking lot and the front desk. Not because I was trying to be dramatic. Okay, Maybe a little bit because I was trying to be dramatic, but because I needed this whole night documented from every possible angle. When you're building a case that's going to destroy someone's life, you don't leave anything to chance. The night clerk was this kid who couldn't have been more than 22, all earnest concern and customer service training. He took one look at my soggy clothes and immediately went into crisis management mode. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? Should we call someone?" "Just a room," I told him, sliding my emergency credit card across the marble counter and maybe a towel if you've got one handy. His name tag said Marcus. And Marcus was the kind of employee who takes his job seriously. He didn't just check me in. He documented everything. The time, my condition, my polite refusal of medical assistance. He even noted in the system that I'd arrived via taxi when I casually mentioned it, which wasn't technically true, but wasn't technically false either. Rook's truck could be a taxi if you squinted hard enough and had a flexible relationship with the truth. The room was standard business hotel fare, beige carpet, generic art, and a bed that had seen better decades. But it had something more valuable than luxury amenities. It had a timestamp on everything. Key card access and room phone system, even the pay-per-view menu that I definitely wasn't going to use, but that would show I was here and not somewhere else planning elaborate revenge schemes. I ordered room service, just soup and coffee, nothing fancy, and made sure to have a nice long conversation with the delivery guy about the weather and how terrible it was to be caught out in a storm like this. Poor guy probably thought I was just making small talk, but every word was going into his memory bank for later recall. People remember conversations, especially when they involve someone who looks like they've been through the ringer. That's when my phone started ringing. The first call came at 12:17 a.m. and the caller ID made me smile. Mara home. Because of course, she'd saved herself in my phone as home instead of just using her name. Everything with Mira had to be a statement about ownership and control that I let it ring. Then I let the next 3 calls ring, too. The voicemails started around 12:45, and they were exactly what I'd expected. First came amusement. "Adrian, don't be such a drama queen. Call me back when you're done pouting." Classic Mira. Turn your victim's reasonable response to abuse into evidence of their emotional instability. Then came annoyance. "This is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. I'm not playing this game with you." Notice how it was never her fault, never her problem. I was the one being unreasonable for not appreciating her creative approach to marriage counseling. By 1:30 a.m. she'd moved on to actual anger. "You're embarrassing yourself, Adrian, and you're embarrassing me. Whatever point you think you're making, you've made it. Now come home and we'll talk about this like adults." Like adults. That was rich coming from someone who'd literally abandoned her husband on the side of the highway like a broken down car. But here's where it got interesting. The cavalry started arriving around 2 a.m. first. Belle tried her hand at emotional manipulation. "Adrian, honey, Myra is really worried about you. We all are. This isn't like you. Please just call and let us know you're safe. We all are, right? Because nothing says genuine concern like a group text coordinating your guilt trip strategy." Kira went with threats. "Look, Adrian, I don't know what kind of stunt you think you're pulling, but this is getting out of hand. Myra is talking about calling the police and reporting you missing. Is that really what you want?" Yes. Threaten to involve law enforcement because that always works out well when you're the ones who committed the actual crime. But Tessa, sweet, simple Tessa, that's where things got really beautiful. See, Tessa had been drinking all night, which meant she'd completely forgotten that subtlety was supposed to be part of their strategy. Her voicemail was a masterpiece of incrimination. "Adrian, oh my God, we're so sorry. We didn't think you'd actually stay out there. It was just supposed to be funny, you know, like a prank. Mira said you needed to learn your place, but we didn't mean for it to go this far." I played that message 3 times, just savoring the pure, unfiltered admission of guilt. Then I saved it to the cloud because you can never be too careful with evidence that good. Around 3 a.m., they must have had a strategy meeting because the messages suddenly got coordinated. All 3 of them started sending variations of the same theme. This was all a misunderstanding. They were just trying to help our marriage. They never meant for me to actually walk home in the ring. Classic abuser playbook. Minimize, deny, shift, blame. But the crown jewel came at 3:47 a.m. in the form of a video message from Tessa's phone. The 4 of them, clearly drunk, toasting with champagne glasses in what looked like Myra's living room. To teaching Adrienne a lesson, Mira said, raising her glass with a smile that would have made a shark proud. "Some people need to learn things the hard way." I watched that video 5 times, taking careful notes of the timestamp, the location, the participants, and the exact wording of their little celebration. Then I forwarded it to my secure email account, uploaded it to 3 different cloud storage services, and sent a copy to Rook with instructions to add it to the legal file. By 4 a.m. my phone had finally stopped ringing, and I was sitting in that generic hotel room with a stack of evidence that would make any prosecutor weep with joy. Recordings of the abandonment, voicemails admitting guilt, video evidence of them celebrating my suffering, and a complete digital trail of their coordination efforts that I set my phone on the nightstand, pulled the covers up to my chin, and smiled at the ceiling. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. But tonight, for the first time in 8 months, I slept like a baby. Sometimes the best traps are the ones people walk into all by themselves. You know that feeling when you're about to drop a bombshell so nuclear that it's going to leave a crater where someone's life used to be? That's exactly how I felt walking into the courthouse at 8:30 a.m. 3 hours of sleep and a thermos of hotel coffee powering me through what was about to become the most satisfying morning of my adult life. The rain had stopped, but the clouds were still hanging around like they wanted front row seats to the show. Rhea Park was waiting for me on the courthouse steps, looking like she'd been born in a power suit and raised on legal briefs. The woman doesn't just practice law, she weaponizes it. When I called her at 6 a.m. to set everything in motion, she'd sounded like Christmas had come early. Emergency filing went through 20 minutes ago, she said, handing me a coffee that was definitely better than what I'd been drinking. Judge Harper Lynn drew the case. She's got a reputation for not tolerating games, which works in our favor. We're in courtroom 3C at 1 p.m. What are we hitting them with? I asked, even though I already knew. We'd gone over this strategy so many times I could recite it in my sleep. Emergency injunction for spousal abandonment, coercive control, and financial misappropriation. Oh, and I added intentional infliction of emotional distress just for fun. Her smile was the kind that should come with a warning label. Your wife's going to need a very good lawyer. And even then, she's screwed. The beauty of emergency filings is that they move fast. Too fast for the other side to mount a proper defense, especially when they're probably still nursing hangovers from their victory celebration. By 9 a.m., Mira had been served with papers that turned her world upside down. By 10 a.m., she was probably screaming at some expensive lawyer who was trying to explain that you can't unabandon your spouse on a highway. That I spent the morning at Rhea's office going through our evidence one more time. Audio recordings, video clips, financial documents, hotel receipts, witness statements. We had enough ammunition to fight a small war. But the real weapon was something much simpler. The truth. When you're dealing with pathological liars, the truth is like kryptonite. It doesn't matter how good their lawyer is, you can't argue with reality. Courtroom 3C was everything you'd expect from a small-town courthouse with paneling that had seen better decades. Fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly green and the kind of uncomfortable seating that reminded you that justice wasn't supposed to be comfortable. Judge Harper Lynn looked exactly like someone who'd spent 30 years listening to people's excuses and had run out of patience somewhere around year 5 that Mira arrived 15 minutes late, which was already a bad look. She'd managed to pull together her courtroom outfit, conservative dress, minimal makeup, the whole respectable businesswoman wrongly accused aesthetic, but she couldn't quite hide the fury in her eyes, or the way her hands shook slightly when she thought no one was looking. Her lawyer, some glossy downtown type who probably charged more per hour than most people make in a week, was already looking like he regretted taking this case. Your Honor, Rhea began, and her voice carried that perfect blend of professional courtesy and barely contained outrage. My client was abandoned by his wife and her associates 87 miles from home during a severe weather event. This wasn't a marital dispute. This was criminal endangerment disguised as domestic discipline. She hit play on the audio recording and suddenly the courtroom was filled with Myra's voice saying the words that were about to destroy her life. You need a lesson, Adrienne. Walk it off. Then came the sound of car doors slamming and engines starting and me standing alone in the rain while 4 women drove away laughing. The silence in that courtroom was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the parking lot. Judge Lynn's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Something cold and final. Myra's lawyer jumped up like his pants were on fire. Your Honor, this was clearly a misunderstanding between spouses. My client never intended. Counselor, Judge Lynn interrupted, and her tone could have frozen hell. I suggest you listen to the rest of the evidence before you finish that sentence. Rhea was just getting started. She pulled out the financial documents that Valentina had organized into a timeline so clear that even a first-year law student could follow the money trail. Offshore accounts that Mira thought I didn't know about. Corporate credit cards used for personal expenses, consulting fees that went to companies that existed only on paper. Your Honor, we have documented evidence of systematic financial abuse spanning 18 months, Rhea continued, spreading the papers across the table like a poker player revealing a royal flush. The defendant has been embezzling from both marital assets and her employer's charitable fund. That's when things got really interesting. Myra's lawyer started whispering frantically in her ear, probably trying to explain that this had just escalated from a domestic dispute to a federal crime. Myra's face went from angry to pale to something approaching panic. But we weren't done. Oh, we were nowhere near done. Furthermore, Your Honor, Rhea said, and I could hear the barely contained glee in her voice. We have video evidence of the defendant and her co-conspirators celebrating the commission of this crime. The courtroom's big screen lit up with Tessa's drunken video masterpiece. For women raising champagne glasses, Myra's voice crystal clear to teaching Adrienne a lesson. Some people need to learn things the hard way. Their laughter echoing through the speakers like the sound of their own doom. Judge Lynn watched the entire video without blinking. When it finished, she turned to Myra's lawyer with the kind of look that could melt steel. "Counselor, does your client have anything to say about this celebration of what she now claims was a misunderstanding?" Myra's lawyer looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. "Your Honor, my client was emotional and perhaps spoke unwisely, but your client," Judge Lynn said, cutting him off with surgical precision, "documented herself committing what appears to be multiple felonies. In my courtroom, we call that evidence." The questions that followed were simple and sharp, designed to give Myra enough rope to hang herself. Did she abandon her husband on a highway? Yes, but it was just supposed to teach him a lesson. Did she take money from joint accounts without his knowledge? Yes, but she had every right to manage their finances. Did she celebrate leaving him stranded in the rain? Well, yes, but they were just blowing off steam. Each answer was another nail in her coffin. Each excuse made the judge's expression a little colder. By the time Rhea finished presenting our case, Myra looked like someone who just realized she'd brought a knife to a nuclear war. When Judge Lynn finally spoke, her words fell like hammer blows. "I am immediately freezing all marital assets pending a full forensic investigation. I am granting the petitioner exclusive use of the marital home. I am issuing a no-contact order preventing the respondent from harassing, threatening, or approaching the petitioner, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution." The gavel came down like thunder, and just like that, Myra's carefully constructed world collapsed into rubble. She sat there staring at the table, probably trying to figure out how a simple lesson had turned into complete and total destruction that I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just gathered my papers, thanked Rhea for her excellent work, and walked out of that courtroom feeling like I could breathe for the first time in years. Sometimes justice isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's just about getting free. You know what's funny about living in a small town? News travels faster than a speeding bullet, and gossip moves at the speed of light. By the time I walked out of that courthouse, half the county probably knew that Myra Costanos had just gotten legally demolished in front of Judge Harper Lynn. By evening, it was everywhere. Local news, social media, even the grocery store checkout line where Mrs. Henderson from down the street was telling anyone who'd listen about that poor man who got left on the highway. The headline on Channel 7's website was pure gold. Local entrepreneur left 87 miles from home by wife and friends. Court orders emergency asset freeze. They'd managed to get a photo of me walking out of the courthouse looking appropriately shell-shocked, which was perfect for the narrative. Nothing sells a story like a good victim photo. And I have to admit, 3 hours of sleep and a morning of legal warfare had given me exactly the right look. And my phone started buzzing around 6 p.m. and it didn't stop for the next 4 hours. Neighbors who'd never spoken to me before suddenly wanted to check on my well-being. Old college friends crawled out of the woodwork to express their shock and support. Even my dentist called to see if I was okay, which was either touching or a brilliant marketing move. I couldn't quite tell which, but the real entertainment was happening in the digital underground where I wasn't supposed to have access. See, one of the many things Myra didn't know about Rook's security upgrade was that he'd managed to mirror the group chat she used with her 3 accomplices. Every message, every photo, every moment of panic was being automatically forwarded to a secure server that would make everything admissible in court. And let me tell you, watching that chat meltdown in real time was better than cable television. Started around 7 p.m. with Belle, who apparently had the emotional intelligence of a house plant. What the actual hell just happened? I thought this was supposed to be a simple domestic thing. Kira jumped in next because Kira always has to be the voice of reason. Even when reason left the building hours ago, we need to shut this down now. Delete everything. I mean everything. Photos, texts, all of it. But Tessa, bless her heart, was way ahead of them. Too late. My cousin works at the courthouse. Says they have video of us from last night. The champagne thing. We're so screwed. That's when Myra finally showed up in the chat. And you could practically feel the rage radiating through the screen. Everyone calm down. This is just Adrienne being dramatic. It'll blow over in a week. Belle wasn't buying it. Blow over. Myra, they froze your bank accounts. This isn't blowing over. This is blowing up. The conversation devolved from there into a masterpiece of panic, blame shifting, and spectacular stupidity. Kira wanted to hire a crisis management firm. Tessa thought they should all get lawyers. Belle suggested they claim it was performance art, and Myra was still convinced she could somehow spin this as a misunderstanding between loving spouses. But the real bombshell came around 9:00 p.m. when my phone rang with a number I recognized, my younger cousin Quinn. Now Quinn and I had never been particularly close, mostly because Quinn had a talent for making spectacularly bad life decisions and then expecting the family to bail her out. But when she called that night, her voice was shaking like she'd seen a ghost. "Adrian. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what, Quinn?" "I need to tell you something about Mira. About what she asked me to do." And that's when the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Turns out my dear wife had approached Quinn 6 months ago with a proposition that was equal parts clever and disgusting. Quinn had racked up about 12 grand in credit card debt, online shopping, expensive dinners, the usual millennial financial disaster story. Mira offered to make it all disappear in exchange for one simple favor. Keep tabs on me. She wanted to know everything. Quinn sobbed into the phone. Your schedule, your friends, who you talked to, what websites you visited. She said you were having some kind of midlife crisis and she needed to know if you were cheating or planning to leave her. And you said, yes, I needed the money, Adrian. I was about to lose my apartment. She made it sound like she was just being a concerned wife. The beautiful irony was that Quinn had been feeding Mira information about my completely boring, completely faithful routine for months while Mira was off embezzling money and having affairs with her business mentor. It was like hiring a private investigator to follow a monk while you're out robbing banks. Quinn, I said, and I could hear her holding her breath. I need you to write down everything. Every conversation, every payment, every instruction she gave you. Can you do that? You're not going to press charges against me, are you? That depends on how helpful you're over the next few days. While I was dealing with family betrayal, Valentina was busy following the money trail that just kept getting deeper and more twisted. She called around 10 p.m. with an update that made my head spin. Adrian, you need to sit down for this one. I found the Cayman Islands account. The what now? Karen Limited registered in the Cayman Islands 18 months ago. Primary beneficiary, Mara Kostanos. Secondary beneficiary, Trent Lawson. They've been moving money through this shell company for over a year. The numbers were staggering. What I thought was maybe 50 or 60,000 in missing funds turned out to be closer to 300,000. Money from Myra's Women in Tech Empowerment Fund have been flowing directly into Trent's cryptocurrency wallet. Corporate retreat expenses that were actually luxury vacations. Equipment purchases that existed only on paper. How much of this is criminal? I asked. All of it, Valentina said cheerfully. Wire fraud, tax evasion, embezzlement, probably racketeering if we can prove ongoing conspiracy. The FBI is going to love this case. By midnight, Ria had compiled everything into a package that looked like a federal prosecutor's wet dream. Financial crimes, documented abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and enough recorded confessions to fill a small library. She'd already reached out to contacts in the district attorney's office, and the word was that they were very interested in taking a closer look at Myra's business dealings. The group chat finally went quiet around 1 a.m., probably because someone with half a brain cell had finally convinced them to stop creating evidence of their own guilt. But the damage was done. Every panicked message, every admission of wrongdoing, every attempt to coordinate their stories was safely stored on servers they didn't even know existed that I sat in my hotel room because Judge Lynn's order meant I could kick Mira out of our house. But I wasn't quite ready for that level of confrontation yet. And reviewed the day's haul. Audio recordings, video confessions, financial documents, witness statements, and now a digital trail of conspiracy that led directly to a federal crime. 8 months of quiet work had turned into an avalanche of evidence that was going to bury Mira and her friends so deep they'd need archaeological equipment to dig them out. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving people enough rope to hang themselves. And boy, have they ever made good use of that rope. Walking into my own house with a court order in one hand and Rook beside me felt like some kind of strange homecoming. Except instead of feeling relief or comfort, I felt like an investigator entering a crime scene, which as it turned out was exactly what I was doing. The place looked the same as when I'd left for dinner the night before, but everything felt different. The air itself seemed contaminated with lies and betrayal, like the walls had absorbed 18 months of deception and were now quietly confessing their secrets. Mira was long gone. Of course, Judge Lynn's order had been crystal clear. She had until 6 p.m. to collect essential personal items and get out. No furniture, no electronics, no access to the home office where she'd been running her little criminal enterprise. Rook had been watching the place since noon, making sure she didn't try to destroy evidence or accidentally walk off with anything that might incriminate her. She came and went around 3:00 p.m. he reported as we stood in the foyer that suddenly felt too big and too empty. 2 suitcases and a makeup bag. Spent about 20 minutes in the office, but the cameras caught everything. Want to see? Of course, I wanted to see. Watching Mira panic in real time had become my new favorite hobby. Right behind documenting her crimes and ahead of planning her complete social destruction. The security footage was beautiful in its simplicity. There was my soon-to-be ex-wife, frantically searching through filing cabinets and desk drawers like a burglar looking for the good silver. She tried to access her laptop, the one where I'd first discovered the duplicate ledgers, but Rook's security protocols had locked her out the moment the court order was filed. The look of pure rage on her face when she realized she couldn't get into her own computer was worth framing. She tried the safe, too, Rook added. And there was definitely amusement in his voice. Spent 10 minutes trying different combinations before she remembered that you changed the code last month. Yes, the safe. Myra's little fortress of secrets that she thought was impregnable. What she didn't know was that Rook had been watching her enter that code for weeks. And the new security system included some very sophisticated recording equipment positioned at exactly the right angle to catch keypad entries. The safe was hidden behind a reproduction Monet in Myra's office because of course it was hidden behind art because Myra always had to make everything into a production. Inside was exactly what we'd expected to find, plus a few surprises that made me question whether I'd ever really known my wife at all. First came the paperwork, authorization forms with my name printed in block letters, but not actually signed by me. A prenup addendum that I'd never seen before, let alone agreed to. That would have given me complete control over my business assets in case of divorce. Insurance policy changes that made her the sole beneficiary of accounts I didn't even know existed. It was like finding a blueprint for identity theft written in legal jargon. Then came the personal stuff, which was somehow worse than the financial crimes. A jewelry box containing a diamond bracelet I'd never seen before with a card that read to my brilliant partner in crime T. The handwriting was definitely masculine, definitely not mine, and definitely evidence of an affair that had been going on a lot longer than I'd suspected. But the real treasure trove was in the filing cabinet that Myra had been frantically searching through on the security footage. Valentina arrived around 7:00 p.m. with her color-coded binders and forensic accountant superpowers. And within an hour, she'd organized 18 months of financial fraud into a timeline that read like a masterclass in embezzlement. "Look at this," she said, spreading documents across what used to be Myra's desk and was now apparently evidence central. "Every single transfer to Karen Limited corresponds to a major event in your marriage. Fight about money. 10,000 gets moved offshore. You question a business expense. Another 15,000 disappears into crypto." The pattern was so clear it was almost insulting. Myra had been using our marital problems as cover for systematically looting our assets. Every time I brought up financial concerns or asked reasonable questions about spending, she'd escalate the emotional conflict to distract me while moving money out of accounts I could access and into ones I couldn't even see. "This one's particularly clever," Valentina continued, pointing to a series of transfers from last spring. She reported these as charitable donations on your joint tax return. But the money actually went to a shell company owned by Trent's business partner. They're not just stealing from you, they're using you as an unwitting accomplice in tax fraud. Rhea showed up around 8 p.m. looking like a prosecutor who'd just been handed the case of the century. She took one look at the evidence spread across the office and started making phone calls to contacts in the financial crimes unit. "This isn't just divorce court material anymore," she said after hanging up with someone who was apparently very excited about financial fraud cases. "The FBI has a task force specifically for this kind of cross-border embezzlement. They're going to want everything." That's when things got really interesting. While Rhea was coordinating with federal investigators and Valentina was organizing evidence into prosecution-ready packages, I decided to do some investigating of my own. See, I knew Myra better than anyone and I knew she had a weakness for keeping trophies of her victories that I found them in the bedroom in a shoebox hidden in the back of her closet like some kind of psychopath scrapbook. Screenshots of bank transfers, printed emails between her and Trent discussing their exit strategy, photos of expensive purchases made with embezzled money, and at the bottom of the box, a handwritten list titled Adrian's Training Progress with dates and notes about my behavioral modifications. Reading that list was like getting punched in the stomach with a dictionary of psychological abuse. March 15th. Successfully redirected his questions about Caribbean trip into argument about trust. April 22nd convinced him that asking about consulting fees shows controlling behavior. May 8th used friends to reinforce message about knowing his place in relationship. Every fight we'd had, every moment of self-doubt she'd created, every time she'd made me feel like I was being unreasonable for asking basic questions about our finances, it was all documented like a science experiment. She'd been systematically destroying my confidence and gaslighting me into submission while stealing everything we'd built together. "Jesus Christ," Rook said when I showed him the list. And coming from a guy who'd spent years in places where people tried to kill him on a regular basis, that was saying something. But here's the thing about evidence. It's only as good as your ability to use it. And we were about to use all of it to destroy the carefully constructed lie that had been my marriage. Rhea had already filed amended charges that included federal crimes. Valentina had traced the money trail all the way to the Cayman Islands and back. And I had documentation of psychological abuse that would make any jury want to lock Myra up and throw away the K.A. By 10 p.m. the house that had been my prison for 18 months had been transformed into command central for the most comprehensive takedown in recent legal history. Every room told a story of deception. Every document revealed another layer of fraud, and every piece of evidence pointed toward the same conclusion. Mira had never loved me, never respected me, never seen me as anything more than a convenient mark in an elaborate con game. But you know what? For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not because the house was mine again, though that was nice, but because I was finally telling the truth instead of living someone else's lies. And tomorrow, the whole world was going to know exactly who Mira Kostanos really was. If you've never seen a sociopath realize their entire world is about to implode on live television, let me tell you, it's simultaneously horrifying and deeply satisfying. The hearing for temporary support and control of our business assets was supposed to be a routine legal proceeding. The kind of dry administrative stuff that makes court reporters fall asleep at their keyboards. Instead, it turned into the legal equivalent of a public execution broadcast on local access TV because Judge Lynn believed in transparency for high-profile cases. Mira showed up 45 minutes late, which was either a power play or evidence that she'd spent the morning throwing up from stress, probably both. She'd assembled what looked like half the legal talent in the state. 3 lawyers in suits that cost more than most people's cars. All of them looking like they'd rather be literally anywhere else on earth. Lead counsel was some hotshot from Atlanta named Harrison Keller, the kind of guy who charges $800 an hour to tell rich people their problems aren't their fault. That I, on the other hand, had Rhea Park, a banker's box full of evidence, and the quiet confidence that comes from holding all the cards in a rigged game. We'd spent the morning organizing our presentation like a murder trial, complete with visual aids and a timeline that even a drunk jury could follow. Every document had been authenticated, every recording had been verified, and every witness statement had been notarized by someone who wasn't currently under federal investigation. The courtroom was packed. Word had gotten out about the highway abandonment. And apparently, half the county wanted to see how this particular train wreck would unfold. I spotted at least 3 people with notepads who were definitely reporters, plus a sketch artist who kept looking between me and Mira like she was trying to capture the exact moment when someone's life falls apart. Judge Lynn opened the proceedings with the kind of calm professionalism that made it clear she'd already read every document in our filing and was not impressed with what she'd found. We're here to determine temporary asset allocation and business control, pending the resolution of both civil and criminal proceedings. Mr. Keller, your client has some significant explaining to do. Keller tried to go on the offensive right out of the gate, painting me as an unstable husband who was weaponizing the legal system to punish his wife for what amounted to a marital spat. Your Honor, my client made an error in judgment during an emotional moment. Leaving Mr. Kostanos at that location was inappropriate, yes, but it hardly justifies the nuclear response we've seen from opposing counsel. Nuclear response. Rhea stood up with the kind of smile that should come with a radiation warning. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A. She hit play on the courtroom sound system and suddenly everyone was listening to Myra's voice saying those beautiful, incriminating words, "You need a lesson, Adrian. Walk it off." Followed by the sound of car doors slamming and engines starting and me standing alone in the rain while 4 grown women drove away laughing. The silence that followed was so complete you could have performed surgery in it. Judge Lynn's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the atmosphere of the room like the moment before lightning strikes. Mr. Keller, she said quietly, that didn't sound like an error in judgment. That sounded like premeditated abandonment. Keller looked like he wanted to object, but what do you say to audio evidence of your client committing the exact crime she's accused of? Instead, he tried to minimize a momentary lapse in. We're just getting started, Rhea interrupted. And I swear I could see Myra's soul leave her body. Your Honor, I'd like the court to review our financial exhibits. That's when Valentina's months of forensic work turned into courtroom theater. Screen after screen of bank transfers, shell company registrations, offshore accounts, and wire trails that painted a picture so clear even a kindergartner could follow the money. Every stolen dollar had been traced. Every fake expense had been documented. Every lie had been turned into evidence. Your Honor, Rhea continued, and her voice carried the kind of prosecutorial authority that makes guilty people confess. The defendant has systematically embezzled approximately $300,000 from marital assets and an additional $400,000 from her employer's charitable fund over the past 18 months. That number hit the courtroom like a physical force. $700,000. Not grocery money or shopping sprees. Serious federal crime money. The kind of money that gets you featured on true crime podcasts. Keller was scrambling now, trying to interrupt with objections that Judge Lynn shot down faster than he could formulate them. But the real fireworks started when Judge Lynn asked the question that destroyed everything. Miss Kostanos, can you explain why you withdrew $220,000 the week of your alleged business retreat? Myra's voice when she finally spoke sounded like someone had filled her throat with broken glass. Vendor payments, Your Honor. Legitimate business expenses. And these vendors were located at the Atlantis Resort in the Bahamas. That's when Rhea produced the hotel ledger that Valentina had somehow managed to get from the resort's billing department. Same dates as the business retreat. Same credit card as the vendor payments. Mr. and Mrs. Trent Lawson in the presidential suite running up champagne bills that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear individual heartbeats. Myra's lawyers were having a whispered conference that looked like a suicide intervention. And Mira herself was staring at the table like she was trying to will herself into another dimension. But we weren't done. Oh, we were nowhere near done. Your Honor, Rhea said, and I could hear the barely contained excitement in her voice. I'd like to call a surprise witness. That's when the courtroom doors opened and Marisol Vega walked in looking like someone who'd been carrying the weight of the world and had finally decided to put it down. Marisol had been Trent's executive assistant for 3 years, which meant she'd had front row seats to the entire criminal enterprise. More importantly, she'd been recording conversations and copying documents for weeks, waiting for the right moment to come forward. I can't carry this anymore, she said. When Judge Lynn asked why she was there, her voice was shaking, but her words were crystal clear. They've been planning this for months. The embezzlement, the affair, even framing Mr. Castaños for tax fraud using forged documents. The evidence she presented was devastating. Recorded conversations where Mira and Trent discussed which accounts to hit next. Email chains about offshore banking procedures. And most damning of all, text messages where they laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me into signing documents I didn't understand. Mira went completely silent after that. Not the strategic silence of someone following legal advice, the absolute silence of someone whose entire reality had just collapsed. Her lawyers looked like they were mentally calculating how fast they could withdraw from the case. Judge Lynn didn't need to deliver it. I am immediately expanding the asset freeze to include all entities associated with the defendant and Mr. Lawson. I am granting the petitioner full control of all business operations. And I am referring this entire matter to federal prosecutors for criminal investigation. The gavel came down like the hammer of God. And just like that, Myra's carefully constructed empire became a federal crime scene. As I walked out of that courtroom, I could hear the reporters already calling their editors with the story of the century. Local businesswoman caught running elaborate fraud scheme, abandoned husband on highway to cover tracks. Sometimes justice isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's about watching the truth finally see daylight. You know what's beautiful about federal prosecutors? They don't mess around with half measures or plea bargains that let rich people buy their way out of consequences. When the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia got their hands on our evidence package, they moved like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. By the time Mira and her accomplices figured out they were drowning, the feds had already circled back for seconds. The grand jury convened on a Tuesday morning in February, and by Thursday afternoon, they'd returned indictments that read like a greatest hits album of white-collar crime. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and my personal favorite, using electronic communications to facilitate the commission of felonies. That last one covered everything from the group chat coordination to Tessa's drunken victory video. Turning their own stupidity into federal evidence. Mira and Trent got hit with the full menu of charges. Each one carrying enough prison time to ensure they'd be eligible for Social Security by the time they got out. But the real cherry on top was watching the legal system treat Belle, Kira, and Tessa exactly like what they were, accessories to a crime who'd helped document their own guilt. The three of them got charged with criminal conspiracy and obstruction of justice. After the FBI, I discovered they'd spent the night of the courthouse hearing frantically deleting text messages and social media posts. What they didn't know, because apparently none of them understood how the internet actually works, was that everything had already been backed up to cloud servers that required federal warrants to access. Their panic deletion spree just became more evidence of consciousness of guilt. The arraignments were a masterclass in watching privilege meet reality. Mira showed up in designer clothes and an attitude that suggested she still thought this was all some kind of misunderstanding that expensive lawyers could fix. Trent looked like someone who'd been living on nothing but anxiety and coffee for weeks. And the three accomplices, they looked like they'd finally figured out that actions have consequences, even when you're white, educated, and used to getting away with everything. But the real entertainment came during the plea negotiations, which I got to watch from the gallery like it was live theater. Trent folded faster than a lawn chair in a hurricane, taking a plea deal that included full cooperation with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence, 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and complete financial restitution. His cooperation included turning over passwords to encrypted accounts, recordings of conversations with Mira about money laundering, and a detailed timeline of their criminal partnership that read like a how-to guide for embezzlement. Mira, on the other hand, fought like someone who genuinely believed she could lawyer her way out of recorded confessions and bank records. Her legal team burned through 3 different defense strategies before settling on the classic blame the victim approach that works so well in domestic violence cases. According to her lawyers, I was a controlling husband who'd driven her to desperate measures. And the embezzlement was really just a woman trying to establish financial independence from an abusive marriage. The problem with that defense, we had 18 months of audio recordings that proved exactly the opposite. Every conversation where Mira threatened me, every casual cruelty, every moment where she treated me like a misbehaving pet, it was all admissible evidence that painted a very different picture of our marriage. The criminal trial started in September, almost a year after that night on the highway. Federal court is a different animal from state proceedings. More formal, more serious, and staffed with people who've seen every scam in the book and aren't impressed by much of anything. The jury was a mix of working-class folks who understood exactly what it meant to have someone steal your money, and they were not sympathetic to tales of privileged women who needed to embezzle hundreds of thousands of dollars to feel empowered. Demarisol's testimony was devastating. 3 days on the witness stand walking the jury through recorded conversations where Mira and Trent discussed their exit strategy and laughed about how easy it was to manipulate me into signing financial documents. She'd kept meticulous records, dates, times, amounts, even screenshots of text messages where they celebrated successful transfers to offshore accounts. But the moment that sealed Myra's fate was when the prosecutor played the audio recording from that night on the highway. Not just the abandonment, the entire evening, from dinner conversation to roadside cruelty. The jury got to hear Mira discussing her plans to teach me a lesson while she was actively stealing our money and cheating with her business partner. The verdict came back after 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering, and tax evasion. The judge called their crimes an elaborate scheme motivated by greed and executed with callous disregard for the victim's well-being. Sentencing was 3 weeks later and Judge Richardson delivered the kind of judicial smackdown that law students will probably study for decades. Mira got 4 years in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised release, complete financial restitution, and a lifetime ban from working in financial services. The judge specifically noted that her pattern of manipulative behavior and complete lack of remorse made her a danger to any future victims. Trent got his 5 years as agreed, but the judge made it clear that his cooperation was the only thing standing between him and a much longer sentence. Mr. Lawson, you were an adult when you chose to prey on the trust of charitable organizations and exploit your professional relationships for personal gain. The only reason you're not facing a decade in prison is your willingness to help us understand the full scope of this criminal enterprise. The 3 accomplices got probation and community service, plus fines that would keep them financially uncomfortable for the foreseeable future. The judge was particularly harsh with Belle, noting that her active participation in the highway abandonment showed a level of cruelty that goes beyond mere conspiracy. But the real consequence, the one that probably hurt more than prison time, was the complete destruction of their social and professional lives. The story had gone national by then, picked up by true crime podcasts and social media accounts that specialized in wealthy people getting their comeuppance. Myra's Women in Tech Empowerment Fund became a punchline about how not to run a nonprofit. Trent's consulting business collapsed when clients realized their advisor was a convicted felon. Even their friends abandoned them. The social circle that had enabled and encouraged their behavior suddenly developed collective amnesia about ever knowing them. Country club memberships were quietly revoked. Professional associations issued strongly worded statements about ethical standards. The same people who'd laughed at their casual cruelty were now pretending they'd never met them. That I watched it all from a distance, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't sympathy either. More like the quiet relief that comes from finally putting down a weight you'd been carrying for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. Justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's just about making sure the truth finally gets told and letting the consequences fall where they may. And sometimes the consequences are exactly what people deserve. You know what nobody tells you about winning a massive legal victory? The morning after the sentencing, you wake up in an empty house with nothing but silence and the weird realization that revenge, no matter how satisfying, doesn't actually fill the hole that abuse carved out of your life. Don't get me wrong, watching Mira get dragged off in federal custody was deeply therapeutic. But when the courtroom drama ended and the reporters went home, I was left with something I hadn't had in years. Complete freedom to decide who I wanted to be. The first thing I did was sleep for about 16 hours straight. Not because I was tired, though God knows I was, but because for the first time in years, I could sleep without wondering what fresh hell would be waiting for me when I woke up. No more monitoring bank accounts for mysterious transfers. No more recording conversations to protect myself. No more walking on eggshells in my own house. Just blessed, boring, ordinary sleep in a bed that finally felt like mine. The second thing I did was call Quinn. My cousin had been a wreck since testifying against Mira, convinced that the family would ostracize her for her part in the surveillance scheme. What she didn't understand was that her willingness to come forward to admit her mistakes and help expose the truth had actually saved her from serious criminal charges. The prosecutors had been preparing to indict her as an accessory until she cooperated fully and testified without immunity. I keep thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't called you, she said when I picked her up for lunch at a diner that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead. What if I just kept taking her money and pretending everything was normal? But you didn't, I reminded her. When it mattered, you did the right thing. That counts for something. She'd been sober for 6 months by then, working a program and attending meetings that had taught her the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt was useful. It motivated people to make amends. Shame was just self-destructive noise that kept you stuck in the same patterns. Quinn was learning to work with guilt and ignore shame, which made her the perfect person for what I had in mind. The idea had been percolating since the trial ended. Sitting in that courtroom listening to testimony about financial abuse and psychological manipulation, I'd realized something that should have been obvious. I wasn't the only person who'd been through this kind of hell. The tactics Mira had used, the gaslighting, the financial control, the systematic destruction of self-confidence, weren't unique to our marriage. They were standard operating procedure for abusers who preferred psychological warfare to physical violence. That's how the Northline Initiative was born. Named after the highway where I'd been abandoned, because sometimes the worst moments in your life become the foundation for the best things you'll ever build. Rhea helped me navigate the nonprofit incorporation process, which turned out to be almost as complicated as a federal fraud case, but significantly less likely to result in prison time. The mission statement took weeks to perfect. To provide practical support, legal guidance, and emotional validation for individuals escaping financial coercion, psychological abuse, and social humiliation in intimate relationships. Valentina was the first person I called about volunteering. You want me to do what? She asked when I explained the concept. Run a forensic accounting clinic twice a week. Teach people how to recognize financial abuse, document it properly, and protect themselves legally. Think of it as pro bono work with the potential to prevent federal crimes. She agreed immediately, which didn't surprise me. Valentina had spent her career following money trails that led to destroyed lives, and the chance to intervene before the destruction was complete appeal to her sense of justice. Rook took some convincing, mainly because he wasn't sure his skill set translated to nonprofit work. I'm good at keeping people alive in combat zones, he said. I'm not sure that helps with domestic situations. Are you kidding? I laughed. You taught me how to document evidence, maintain operational security, and execute a long-term strategic plan while living with someone who wanted to destroy me. That's exactly what our clients need to learn. The training program he developed was brilliant in its simplicity. Personal safety protocols that didn't require military training, paper trail management that any adult could learn, de-escalation techniques that worked in suburban kitchens as well as war zones. Most importantly, he taught people how to recognize when a situation was escalating beyond their ability to handle safely and how to get help before it became a law enforcement matter. That we rented an old brick building downtown that had good security, plenty of natural light, and enough space for private counseling sessions. The decor was deliberately unintimidating, comfortable furniture, warm colors, and absolutely no motivational posters about strength or courage. People in crisis don't need platitudes, they need practical help and genuine validation. Quinn became our best hotline volunteer, which made perfect sense once you thought about it. She understood manipulation from both sides, as someone who'd been manipulated by addiction and as someone who'd participated in manipulating others. When panicked callers reached out at 2 a.m., convinced they were losing their minds, Quinn could talk them through the reality check they needed. You're not crazy, she'd tell them, walking them through the same basic steps every time. Freeze the credit card he doesn't know about. Screenshot that threatening text message. Take photos of any physical evidence. Forward that email to a secure account. And remember, you don't have to solve everything tonight. You just have to document what's happening and keep yourself safe until tomorrow. The call started slowly, maybe 3 or 4 a week, but word spread through social media and support groups faster than we'd expected. Within 6 months, we were handling 20+ calls a week from people who'd found our website or gotten our number from someone who'd gotten our number from someone else. Teachers who discovered their spouses were stealing from school fundraisers. Small business owners whose partners were embezzling from company accounts. Stay-at-home parents who'd been systematically cut off from family finances. And convinced they were too stupid to understand money. Each case was different in its specifics, but identical in its pattern. Someone with power using that power to control, manipulate, and abuse someone with less power. The tools varied: financial control, social isolation, psychological manipulation, but the underlying dynamic was always the same. What surprised me was how many men called. The cultural narrative about domestic abuse focuses heavily on women as victims, which makes sense given the statistics. But financial and emotional abuse crosses gender lines more than people realize. And men who find themselves trapped in controlling relationships often have even fewer resources than women. They're embarrassed to admit they're being abused by someone smaller or weaker. Ashamed that they can't just man up and fix the situation. Isolated from support systems that assume all abusers are male, that we help them all without judgment or demographic requirements. Because abuse is abuse, regardless of who's doing it or who's suffering through it to be by the end of our first year. We'd helped 47 people escape abusive situations, prevented an estimated $2 million in financial fraud, and established partnerships with 3 law enforcement agencies that now referred cases to us regularly. Most importantly, we'd created something that would outlast my anger, outlast my need for revenge, and hopefully outlast me entirely. A place where people could come when they felt like they were drowning and leave with a life preserver and a map to shore. Sometimes the best way to heal from trauma isn't to forget it happened. Sometimes it's to make sure it never happens to anyone else. 18 months after that night in the rain, when I thought I'd finally put Mira and her particular brand of poison behind me, she managed one last spectacular display of her complete inability to learn from consequences. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, because of course it did. Tuesdays being the universe's preferred day for delivering emotional sucker punches with the Georgia Department of Corrections return address that made me smile before I even opened it. The handwriting was still perfect, still the same careful script she'd used to forge my signatures on financial documents. Some things never change, even in federal prison. The content was pure mirror, a masterclass in projection, blame shifting, and the kind of delusional thinking that probably made her very popular with the prison psychologists. Adrian, it began because she'd never been one for traditional letter-writing courtesy. I hope you've had time to reflect on your role in what happened to our marriage. I know you always struggled with taking responsibility for your actions, but I hope this experience has taught you something about the consequences of vindictive behavior. I had to pause there to appreciate the sheer audacity. The woman who'd abandoned me on a highway, stolen $700,000, and celebrated both crimes on video was lecturing me about vindictive behavior. It was like getting a fire safety lesson from an arsonist. She went on for 3 pages. 3 full pages of prison commissary paper filled with complaints about how unfair her sentence was, how I'd manipulated the legal system, and how she hoped someday I'd understand that everything she'd done was really my fault for being such a difficult husband. The level of self-delusion required to write that letter from a federal penitentiary was almost impressive in its consistency, but the closing line was what made it worth framing. I hope you learned your lesson. I read that sentence 5 times. Each repetition more hilarious than the last. My lesson. As if the moral of this story was that I should have been more grateful for the privilege of being psychologically tortured and financially abused by someone who thought cruelty was a teaching tool. That I walked into the Northline Initiative office the next morning with the letter in my hand in a frame I'd picked up at the dollar store right there on the wall next to our mission statement to provide practical support, legal guidance, and emotional validation for individuals escaping financial coercion, psychological abuse, and social humiliation. I hung Myra's final masterpiece of narcissistic delusion. New office art? Quinn asked, reading over my shoulder. Educational material. I corrected a reminder of what we're fighting against. The lesson Mira thought she was teaching had nothing to do with the lesson I actually learned. She thought leaving me 87 miles from home would break me down, make me more compliant, prove that she held all the power in our relationship. What she actually taught me was that cruelty when documented properly becomes evidence. That abusers always overplay their hand eventually. That having a plan and the patience to execute it beats having temporary power and the arrogance to abuse it. That my real lesson wasn't obedience. It was clarity. For years, I'd made excuses for her behavior. Convinced myself that her cruelty came from stress or insecurity or some fundamental flaw in my character that justified her treatment. That night on the highway, standing in the rain while she drove away laughing, I finally understood that some people are just broken in ways that can't be fixed, forgiven, or explained away. The afternoon was clear and warm when I decided to take a drive past that old mile marker where everything had changed. The roadside grass had grown back, covering the spot where I'd stood with my phone, recording the sound of my marriage ending. The abandoned way station looked smaller than I remembered, less ominous now that it was just an empty building instead of a symbol of my powerlessness that I pulled over and got out. Standing in almost the exact spot where Rook had found me that night. No storm this time, no drama, just quiet afternoon sunlight and the distant sound of traffic that had somewhere important to be. I thought about the man who'd stood here 18 months ago, confused, hurt, still believing that love meant accepting whatever treatment someone decided you deserved. That man was gone, replaced by someone who understood that love without respect is just elaborate abuse. That kindness without boundaries is just enabling. And that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's dysfunction. That I felt nothing standing there. No anger, no sadness, no lingering resentment. Just the kind of peace that comes from finally understanding that some chapters of your life end not with resolution, but with acceptance. Mira thought leaving me in this spot would teach me my place in the world. Instead, it taught me that I didn't have to have a place in her world at all. The drive back to town was quiet and easy, past familiar landmarks that felt like home again instead of crime scenes. The Northline Initiative was hosting a support group that evening. 8 people who'd found the courage to document their abuse and the strength to escape it. Each of them had their own version of a highway moment. Their own realization that they deserved better than the treatment they'd been accepting. Mira had been wrong about almost everything, but she'd gotten one thing right. I had learned my lesson, just not the one she thought she was teaching. That my lesson was simple. The man she tried to drown in that storm had learned to be the shelter. And that, it turned out, was the only lesson that mattered.